Carolyn bought a treadmill. Let me back up. Not just any treadmill. This thing was an experience. It had a screen the size of a television, live instructors from exotic places yelling at you in energetic Australian accents, and a subscription service that cost more than my car insurance. She said it was a wellness investment. I said, will it make toast too? She didn't laugh. Now, I wouldn't normally find a home gym edition particularly unsettling, but Carolyn had always believed jogging was the cardiovascular equivalent of punishment by boredom. I once caught her describing yoga as lying on the ground, wondering what your taxes are doing. So when she suddenly started referring to her legs as quads, I raised an eyebrow. When she began waking up at 5:30 a.m. to jog virtually up Mount Kilimanjaro with Chad from New Zealand, I raised the other one. We'd been married for 10 years, which in suburban Indiana is the equivalent of 35 in people years. Our home was beige. Everything about it, the walls, the carpet, the relationship, comfortable, predictable. The kind of marriage that looks great on paper but feels like a sock that's lost its elastic, still wearable, but you keep having to tug it back up. And yet, I was okay with that. Beige suited me. Until, of course, the treadmill arrived. That shiny monolith of self-improvement that Carolyn treated like a sacred altar. She'd whisper things like, "Today we run with purpose," while lacing up her shoes. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting at the kitchen table trying to decide whether a Pop-Tart counted as breakfast or a lifestyle choice. Then came the book club. Now, I don't mind book clubs. They're great in theory. People reading things, talking about them, perhaps bonding over a shared hatred of experimental narratives. But this one was different. This one didn't read any books. Carolyn would host it every Thursday. And for 2 hours, 5 women would sit in our living room sipping drinks out of stemless glasses and laughing in that exaggerated way people laugh when they're trying to convince you they're having fun. I asked once, innocently, what book they were reading. Carolyn blinked at me like I'd asked her to define calculus. "Oh, we just sort of discuss themes," she said. "Themes? Sure." One night, I came home early. I'd forgotten my laptop charger and was halfway up the stairs when I heard my name. It wasn't scandalous. Just mentioned. Like you might mention a shoe that doesn't fit quite right, but you wear it anyway, because returning it would be too much of a hassle. "He still folds his socks," one of them said, and they all laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. I do fold my socks. I like neatness. Order. Sue me. That was the first crack. But cracks are funny things. You don't see how deep they go until something falls through. The something, in my case, was a fire extinguisher. Stay with me. We were having a neighborhood yard sale. One of those events where perfectly sane adults gather on a Saturday to haggle over decorative bowls they bought during a nautical phase. Carolyn, who had recently started labeling things with a label maker I didn't know we owned, decided we needed to purge. Out went the fondue set, the pasta maker we used once, and my beloved fire extinguisher. "It's expired," she said, as though that justified it. It wasn't. I checked. It had another 3 years of heroic service in it. Still, I let it go. Or I tried. Until I saw it in the neighbor's garage the next day. Same red cylinder, same faint dent near the nozzle from where I dropped it during a 4th of July that involved too many fireworks and not enough sense. So I walked over. "Nice extinguisher," I said. "Oh, this?" "Yeah." Carolyn gave it to me. Said it didn't spark joy. The man laughed. I didn't. It wasn't about the extinguisher. It was about how easy it was for her to give it away. How something that had belonged to us was suddenly in someone else's hands because it no longer fit the aesthetic. That's when I started paying attention. I noticed the way she talked to people now. Polished. Rehearsed. Like she was always giving a TED talk no one asked for. I noticed the calls that came in during dinner that she didn't answer, but smiled at like an inside joke. I noticed the receipts in the trash for lunches that definitely didn't happen at the Panera she said she went to. Still, I didn't jump to conclusions. Not me. I'm not that guy. I'm the guy who believes in proof. I'm the guy who once spent 6 hours trying to reassemble a broken desk just because the instructions promised it was possible. So when the reunion invitation came, I thought, great. Something normal. Carolyn's high school reunion. She hadn't been back in 15 years. She wanted to look her best, which, in Carolyn terms, meant she spent 3 days exfoliating parts of her I didn't even know had skin. She told me to stay home. "It'll be boring," she said. "Just people reminiscing about varsity jackets and acne." But I had vacation days to burn, and honestly, something felt off. Like watching a play where everyone knows their lines a little too well. So I went, unannounced. The reunion was held at the old community center, which smelled like floor polish and bad decisions. I walked in just in time to hear the DJ playing an early 2000s hit that made everyone feel young and invincible. And there she was, Carolyn, dancing, with a man I didn't recognize, but clearly everyone else did. Handsome in the way that makes you question your own skincare routine. Confident, wearing a fitted blazer like it was part of his skin. They weren't doing anything inappropriate, not technically, but you can tell a lot from body language. You can tell when someone's laughing at everything someone says not because it's funny, but because they want to be the reason it was said in the first place. I didn't interrupt. That's not my style. I stood near the punch bowl, which I'm pretty sure was just tap water with food coloring, and listened. To whispers. To the woman behind me saying, I always knew those two had a spark. To the man next to her replying, well, they did win prom king and queen. And there it was. The reunion wasn't a social courtesy. It was a second chance. A rerun of the teenage drama. Except this time, the stakes were real and the audience wasn't clapping. I left quietly. No confrontation. No dramatic exit. Instead, I went home and packed the treadmill into the garage. Next to it, I placed her label maker. I printed one label before I shut the lid. Beige, upgraded. The first thing I did the morning after the reunion was reassemble the IKEA bookshelf Carolyn had strategically disassembled when she declared the living room needed to feel more open. That was 3 months ago. The books had since lived in uneven stacks on the floor, developing a lean so precise it was starting to look intentional, like a modern art interpretation of gravity. I didn't rebuild the shelf because I was feeling inspired. I did it because passive-aggressively reclaiming furniture space felt like the healthiest thing to do with my hands at that moment. It was either that or alphabetize our tax returns by emotional trauma, and even I wasn't bored enough for that yet. The reunion incident hadn't gone nuclear, which I suppose was a win. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I didn't dramatically storm out. I simply left, as if I had a dinner reservation I was already regretting. Carolyn hadn't even seen me. Or maybe she had and decided I was best ignored, like a pothole or a fire drill. When she came home later that night, much later, she acted like nothing happened, which I found both impressively bold and entirely predictable. She slipped out of her shoes with the ease of someone confident there would be no follow-up questions, tossed her jacket on the banister, and asked if we had any light bulbs. Sure, I said, just let me check which aisle they're in. She stared blankly for half a second, then gave the polite half-laugh she used for strangers and waiters who mispronounced her name. The next few days were quiet in that oddly scheduled sort of way. Carolyn was busy catching up on errands, and I was deeply engaged with my screwdrivers. I fixed things. All of them. That cracked tile in the laundry room, the drawer that never fully closed, the doorstop in the guest bathroom that had been broken since Obama's first term. It was like Habitat for Humanity, but for unresolved tension. Then came the spreadsheet. I found it while looking for a warranty form for the blender that had started making a sound suspiciously like an old man grumbling. I didn't find the form. What I found was a folder on our shared cloud account titled, charmingly, Personal Projects. I expected vacation plans. Or maybe a grocery list with needlessly complicated snack ideas. What I didn't expect was an Excel file named considerations.xlsx. Now, I'm not a snooper. I'm a respecter of digital privacy. But I am also a man who once cross-referenced 3 furniture catalogs to determine the optimal couch firmness, so I'm not unfamiliar with deep dives. I opened it. I wish I could say I closed it immediately. I didn't. Because the first tab was titled Pros and Cons. I was at. You know you've hit a weird life milestone when you discover you've been turned into a bulleted list. According to Carolyn, my pros included steady, does the taxes without whining, and knows how to grill things without asking for instructions. My cons. Predictable, dry sense of humor, not in a good way, and too comfortable being beige. Beige again, the color that haunted me like an off-brand ghost. There was a second tab, Pros and Cons, B. I didn't recognize most of the entries under B, except for one, knows me better than I know myself. Sure, that was followed by spontaneous, compliments me without prompting, and my personal favorite, wakes something up in me. What was B's top con? Unreliable. Nice to know that at least chaos comes with its own warning label. Now, the amateur in me wanted to print the list out, slap it on the fridge, and start labeling my breakfast items as predictable but stable. But I took a different route. I went to the garage and brought back something Carolyn hated even more than visible charging cables: my old pinball machine. It had been living in storage since she decided the living room should be a sanctuary. I plugged it in and spent the next 2 hours playing the same game I'd been obsessed with since high school. The clatter, the noise, the completely pointless flashing lights, it was all mine. That was the first time I felt good in weeks. Carolyn walked in halfway through my third game. She paused in the doorway, her eyes doing the slow pan of disapproval. "What is that doing here?" she asked, gesturing like it was leaking oil. "Rediscovering my inner chaos," I said. "I'm working on being more spontaneous." She didn't laugh. Again, the funny thing is, she didn't push back. She just went upstairs, slowly, like she was trying to decide whether I was joking or had finally broken. And then came the gloves. Not literal ones. Carolyn never got her hands dirty if she could avoid it. No, I mean the passive, strategic comments that slid into our conversations like off-brand fortune cookie messages. "That lamp was always a bit too bright for the room, don't you think?" Translation: "I never liked it, and I blame you for buying it." Some people confuse loyalty with convenience. Translation: "I'm absolutely talking about you, but good luck proving it." We become the things we tolerate. That one was embroidered on a pillow she bought the next day. Everything was coded. Everything was staged. And yet, she still hadn't said anything directly. No declaration. No breakdown. No confrontation. It was like she was waiting for the plot to move itself forward so she wouldn't have to get her hands messy. So I moved it for her. I scheduled a meeting with the neighborhood watch committee. Not because I had security concerns, because I knew she couldn't stand them. Carolyn believed the neighborhood watch was a performative excuse for people with clipboards to feel important, which was a fair assessment. But I also knew that scheduling a meeting and hosting it in our living room would force her to interact with people she found exhausting. So I did it. And it was glorious. 8 neighbors, 1 clipboard, and a discussion about porch lighting that went on for 45 minutes. I saw Carolyn peek down from the staircase, take one look at the semicircle of retired homeowners arguing about bulb wattage, and retreat back into the shadows like a vampire avoiding tax season. It was petty. It was juvenile. And it felt incredible. Because the truth is, when your life has been turned into a spreadsheet evaluation and your marriage is a theme, sometimes you need a reminder that you still get to be the weird guy with a pinball machine who likes his socks folded and his lamps too bright. Carolyn never brought up the meeting. She never brought up the pinball machine, either. But she did start spending more time in the guest room, which was fine. Because the only thing worse than being on someone's cons list is pretending you don't know it exists. 2 days after the neighborhood watch meeting, Carolyn began reorganizing the spices alphabetically, and that's when I knew something was seriously off. This wasn't your average, "I bought new jars and need to feel in control" kind of organizing. No, this was military-level precision. The turmeric had a printed label with the country of origin. The oregano had a QR code. I watched her hold up the paprika like it had personally betrayed her and mutter, "Why do we have Hungarian and Spanish?" Pick a side. That evening, I got an email from someone named Paul. I didn't know Paul. The subject line read, the Committee for Decency. It sounded like the title of a documentary about public television in the 70s. I opened it. Turns out, Paul was the self-appointed president of a hyperlocal initiative, a homeowners subcommittee branching off from the original neighborhood watch. Their goal? Reinforcing community standards in shared spaces. I assumed that meant outlawing gnomes and any mailbox design that made you feel joy. Paul was thrilled about our hosting. He attached a PDF that included a proposed schedule, a list of talking points, and, my personal favorite, a PowerPoint slide titled, "What is a hedge, really?" Carolyn found me reading this on the couch and asked why I looked like I'd just read our house was being foreclosed. I told her we were hosting another meeting next Tuesday. Her eye twitched slightly, which I counted as a win. "I thought you didn't like Paul," she said, sitting down like someone preparing to stage an intervention. "I don't," I replied. "But he's passionate about boundary hedges." Carolyn left the room without responding. That night, she started sleeping with a sleep mask that said, "Do not disturb," in block letters. As if I was going to knock politely in the middle of the night, and ask how her dreams were going. Meanwhile, I kept noticing small changes. She began wearing her presentation outfit more often. That's what I called it. A white blouse she ironed into submission and a pair of black pants that somehow looked both expensive and allergic to movement. She never used to wear that more than once a month, usually for the office quarterly meeting where they handed out awards like most efficient emailer. Now she wore it 3 times in 1 week. Her laptop was never closed anymore. Always on. Always angled just slightly away from wherever I was sitting. She'd take Zoom calls in the laundry room, which was confusing because we don't have a desk in there. Once, I walked in to grab a basket of clothes, and she froze like I'd walked in on a secret government broadcast. The call ended in 4 seconds. "Work stuff?" I asked, carrying socks like a peace offering. "Client onboarding," she said, as if that explained why she minimized the browser like she was diffusing a bomb. Carolyn wasn't good at lying. That was the thing. She was sharp, organized, and irritatingly efficient, but subtlety was not her strong suit. She once tried to hide a birthday cake in the fridge by writing, "Do not open, medical" on the box. I opened it anyway, partly because I'm curious, but mostly because what kind of person refrigerates medicine in a cardboard bakery box? So when she began taking more evening walks, I didn't ask questions. I just took notes. Sometimes she'd leave dressed like she was headed to a panel discussion about startup culture. Other times, she'd go full athleisure, even though I'd never seen her jog a single time in the 15 years we'd known each other. Not even when chased by bees that one summer. One night, I decided to rearrange the garage. Not because it needed it, but because Carolyn had begun parking slightly closer to the left side than usual, and I was intrigued. Her car wasn't fancy, but she treated it like a fragile museum exhibit. She once refused to drive it in a drizzle because it had just been waxed. I noticed a second pair of gym shoes in the back. Men's size 11. Not mine. I wear a 10, and I'm cheap, so I buy the same pair every year like clockwork. These were new. Not tags new, but used by someone with better posture new. I didn't confront her. That would have been too simple. I wanted her to explain it without being prompted. I left the shoes on the front seat and waited. 3 days passed. She didn't say a word. On the 4th day, they were gone. Instead, there was a bag of oranges in their place. Subtle. Very subtle. I started playing chess online again. Not because I missed the game, but because the constant reminders to defend your king felt oddly appropriate. Carolyn's next move was a fake charity drive. On Saturday morning, she told me she was helping a friend from her college alumni network collect donations for a green literacy initiative. I didn't even know what that meant, and I was afraid to ask. She left wearing a tote bag that read, "ECO Feminist with Wi-Fi." She was gone for 5 hours. When she returned, she smelled like a candle store and had 2 business cards in her back pocket, one of which was from a guy named Elliot who offered mindful consulting. I didn't know what that meant either, but I was beginning to think no one at these events did. That night, she asked me if I'd ever considered learning to cook with intention. I asked her if intention came with a side of seasoning. She said I was being cynical. I said I was being consistent. Sunday morning, I made a list. She was definitely hiding something. She was very bad at hiding it. She didn't think I noticed. Monday night, I went into the basement and pulled out the one item that had never failed to disrupt her illusion of control, the trivia box. Carolyn hated it. The trivia box was a gift from my brother, a conversation starter set full of ridiculous questions meant to spark debates no one needed. Things like, would you rather fight a goose every Tuesday or lose Wi-Fi for a week? Carolyn believed questions should have correct answers. The trivia box was chaos. I placed it on the coffee table and waited. When she came home, she saw it and stopped like it was a crime scene. "Really?" she said. "It's Trivia Tuesday," I replied. "It's a new thing I'm trying." She sat down slowly, like she was sitting on a landmine. "Fine," she said. "One question." I pulled the top card. "If you had to choose between being known for your integrity or your charisma, which would you pick?" She blinked. "That's not trivia." "No," I said. "It's character development." Carolyn stood up. She didn't say anything. She went upstairs and closed the door. I drew another card and read it out loud to the empty room. "If you could erase one event from your past, but lose a year of your life, would you?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't need to answer. The first genuine confirmation came from a parking ticket. It was addressed to Carolyn, issued on a Wednesday at 11:26 a.m., downtown. parallel to a building that, based on a quick search, housed a co-working space with a name that sounded like a startup trying to reinvent staplers. Nothing suspicious about a ticket on its own. But Carolyn had told me she was working from home that day due to a data migration crisis. I didn't ask what that meant at the time, mostly because I assumed it had something to do with spreadsheets and sighing heavily. Now, I had the ticket in my hand, issued 2 minutes before her calendar showed a 1:1 with Trina, who I suspect might be fictional. I stood there staring at the fine amount, $42.50, and thought, this might be the most expensive lie she's ever told. At least with the treadmill, we got equipment. I placed the ticket on the dining room table, slightly off-center, knowing full well Carolyn couldn't leave an asymmetrical paper out for more than 7 minutes without repositioning it or dramatically filing it away while giving a lecture about visual clutter. She moved it in 4. Didn't say a word. Just picked it up, opened the drawer we both pretended wasn't a junk drawer, and slid it in like it had never existed. That was the point I gave up on polite curiosity. I pulled up our shared phone bill, a spreadsheet of Carolyn's recent travel reimbursements, and her car's maintenance log, which I only had access to because I was still the email contact for non-engine issues. I began cross-referencing timestamps like a budget detective with too much patience and not enough hobbies. What I found was a pattern. Every other Wednesday, Carolyn was working remote during what I now referred to as co-working lie time. More impressively, she had managed to maintain this without raising alarms. Probably because I was the kind of husband who believed her when she said she couldn't join me for lunch because she had a compliance review debrief. I thought those were real. Now I suspect compliance review was code for pretending not to exist while I step outside and live a secret side quest. I wasn't angry. That would have required surprise. I felt more like a man watching a slow printer spit out a 100-page mistake he couldn't cancel. You just sit there, waiting for the hum to stop, thinking, well, there goes that. I told my brother Marcus. Not because I wanted advice, but because he owed me emotional support after he made me help him build a gazebo last summer with instructions in Italian. He asked, what are you going to do? Probably something unwise but highly organized, I replied. Which brings me to the fake wallet. It was a decoy I ordered online. Looked real. Had fake IDs, expired cards, and one of those punch cards from a coffee shop we never went to. I placed it on the couch right before Carolyn came home one Friday. When she walked in and saw it, she did a double take. Picked it up, turned it over, checked inside. Is this yours? She asked. I looked up from the trivia box I was now using as casual decor. Nope. She paused, then gave a very rehearsed, huh, and left the room. That was the entire exchange. Later, I found it sitting on the hallway console table, carefully positioned as if placed there by a hotel housekeeping staff. She hadn't thrown it out. She hadn't asked follow-up questions. She hadn't even accused me of planting it, which confirmed exactly what I needed to know. You don't challenge a decoy unless you're sure it's a trap. The following week, she began suggesting we redefine our domestic roles. I'm not entirely sure what that was supposed to mean, but it came up during a discussion about garbage bags. Somehow, I'd failed to purchase the correct kind, and this was apparently symbolic of a larger imbalance in our home structure. She asked me if I'd read that article she sent about equitable emotional labor. I told her I got lost after the part where someone cried over dish towels. Then came the worst part. She tried to be nicer. Now, you'd think that might be good. But in our marriage, Carolyn being suddenly affectionate was like a car alarm going off in an empty parking lot. It wasn't a sign of safety, it was a glitch. She started bringing me tea. Randomly. Once during a Zoom call, she entered the room holding a cup like she was auditioning for a role in a British period drama. She even asked if I wanted to connect this weekend. The phrasing alone made me suspicious. We hadn't connected since the plumber had to explain how our sink wasn't haunted, just clogged. It was all a performance. A cover-up for something too inconvenient to confess, too incomplete to abandon. So I turned to the one neutral ground left in our lives, the folding table in the garage. That table had seen everything. Holiday wrapping, DIY disasters, one very poorly planned attempt to assemble a ceiling fan. Now, it would be my war room. I printed out the calendar data, phone records, and mileage logs. I arranged them by date, color-coded the overlaps, and taped them across the table like a man organizing conspiracy theories about his own life. It was all there. March 3rd, doctor's appointment. GPS ping outside co-working space. April 14th, team offsite. Mileage mismatch of 12.7 miles. May 19th, yoga workshop. 0 credit card activity at the yoga studio, but 2 charges at the gas station by the co-working building. I even had screenshots from the neighborhood watch Facebook group. One of the admins, Janice, who could give the NSA a run for its money when it came to local surveillance, had uploaded a blurry photo from a street cleanup event. Guess who was standing in the background? Carolyn, talking to a man in jeans and a smile that didn't belong to any of our social circle. I didn't recognize him, but I didn't need to. He was real. The only thing left was Carolyn's side of the story, which I suspected would be a PowerPoint presentation on personal growth. But I wasn't going to ask for it. Instead, I waited for her to find the table, which she did. One evening after Pilates, she stood there for a while, looking at it. No dramatic gasp, no denial, no screaming. She just stood there like a woman discovering the DMV had been keeping records all along. Then she walked over to the recycling bin and dropped in a flyer that read, "Building Trust After Breach, Community Workshop." Not a word, just the sound of the lid closing. The recycling bin was the most honest thing in our house. It had no hidden agenda, no passive-aggressive remarks, and didn't care who was right as long as plastics went in the right compartment. Carolyn dropping that flyer in it was probably the most transparent communication she'd offered in months. If she had included a written confession, I might have laminated it. After the great evidence table incident, her silent acknowledgement followed by an Olympic-level retreat upstairs, things settled into what I called cordial unease. Think 2 co-workers who once dated and now pretend to be fascinated by break-room weather chats. Carolyn stopped asking about my schedule. I stopped asking where her tote bags kept going. We lived parallel lives, sharing a house like it was a public library, quiet, neutral, and full of people pretending they weren't judging each other's selections. The next phase in our unraveling came from the garage. Not the table this time. The shelf. Third from the top. We had a shared digital assistant. We'll call it the not Alexa, because legally, I don't want her showing up mid-sentence. This thing controlled our lights, thermostat, and, as I recently discovered, recorded audio clips for device training. A polite term for it's been listening to everything. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to figure out why the thermostat kept adjusting to vacation mode, even though we hadn't taken a vacation since Carolyn tried to drag me to a 3-day productivity seminar disguised as a couple's retreat. I opened the app, scrolled through some of the history, and that's when I saw it. Voice clips. Hundreds of them. Most were mundane. Turn off hallway light. Play acoustic focus playlist. Remind me to schedule tires. Then there was one labeled simply, May 3rd, unrecognized voice. Curiosity isn't a crime. Not yet. I hit play. A man's voice. Confident. Low. Laughing. So you actually told him you were reorganizing the linen closet? Carolyn's voice followed, slightly breathless, half laughing. He thinks I'm doing seasonal donation sorting. The man, you're terrifying. Her, efficient. I closed the app. Not because I was shocked. I'd passed shock 2 parts ago. I closed it because my phone was now a witness, and I didn't need it looking at me like it was disappointed. Later that night, I left the device unplugged and moved it into the guest room. I wanted Carolyn to notice. She did. "Why is the assistant in here?" she asked the next morning. She needed a break, I said. Too many lies overheard. Carolyn didn't respond, but I caught her moving the device back 2 days later. As if pretending it hadn't happened was easier than addressing the content of her seasonal donation sorting sessions. Then came the whiteboard. She bought a whiteboard. Not a small one for lists or reminders. A 5-foot-tall rolling monstrosity she placed in the hallway near the kitchen. She said it was for visual task clarity. I said it looked like we were staging a corporate workshop on divorce avoidance. She wrote things on it like shared laundry goals and delegated fridge review. I added find meaning under that in red. She erased it. The most awkward part was the day she wrote Q3 check-in, mutual fulfillment. A phrase that sounds like it was developed by someone who's never experienced either. Are we seriously having quarterly reviews now? I asked. It helps frame conversations, she replied, uncapping a marker with the energy of someone who had read 3 self-help books and retained the most convenient parts. I didn't attend Q3. Instead, I visited the town records office and requested the property deed. This wasn't a declaration. It was a contingency, like carrying a spare tire in your trunk. Most of the time it's just weight, but every now and then, it saves you from walking home in the rain. Carolyn must have sensed the shift. She started leaving printed schedules on the counter again. The same kind she used to tape to the fridge in our first year of marriage. Back then it was sweet. Now it felt like a preemptive defense. If things went wrong, at least she'd have documentation showing where she was, who she was with, and why the man's gym shoes weren't mine. I didn't ask questions. I just circled the word networking brunch in red and wrote, "Hope he brings gluten-free honesty." Carolyn switched to digital calendars again after that. We existed like that for another 2 weeks. Neutral, polite, bizarrely quiet, like a museum that only displays exhibits of things no one wants to remember. Then one morning, during an entirely unnecessary discussion about recycling bin capacity, she finally said, "Maybe we need to have an actual conversation." My first instinct was to pretend I didn't hear her, but the house was too quiet for that to be believable. "Do you mean a normal one, or one where we define our expectations using metaphors from tech conferences?" "I'm being serious," she said. "That's a change." She sat down at the dining table, the same spot where I'd once fixed a broken chair leg while she talked about joint-saving strategies like she was negotiating a ceasefire. She didn't start with an apology or an explanation. She just said, "This isn't working. I think we passed that sign 3 miles ago. I don't want to lie anymore. Did you want to start being honest before or after the linen closet story?" She didn't defend herself. She didn't offer details. She just looked at me like I was a long-lost password she couldn't quite remember. "I'm not proud of it," she finally said. "I don't need you to be proud. I just needed you to be honest 3 months ago." She paused. "So what now?" It was a fair question. I told her I'd been thinking about it, that I'd made a list, that I had considered everything from quiet separation to awkward cohabitation to renting a shed in the backyard and rebranding myself as the man who used to be someone's husband. She didn't laugh. I said we should talk to a lawyer. Split things respectfully. No drama. No printed whiteboard plans. Just paperwork and adult decisions. She nodded. It was the only real thing she'd done in weeks. We spent the rest of the evening in different rooms. No argument. No recap. Just the silent unraveling of two people who had spent years mastering the art of logistics and forgetting how to talk like people. The last official thing we did together was delete the shared grocery list. It lived on a synced app we downloaded 3 years earlier in what now felt like a golden age of mutual optimism. At the time, it seemed revolutionary. A real-time collaborative tool to bridge the deeply complex world of milk, trash bags, and that one obscure brand of yogurt Carolyn insisted had the correct texture. I never knew what that meant, and I never asked. I just found it, bought it, and felt like I'd done something meaningful with my day. Now, it was the last artifact of our life that required mutual digital trust. I stood at the kitchen island, phone in hand, while Carolyn scrolled through hers. She hit Leave List. A simple, graceful exit. No ceremony. No confirmation message like, "Are you sure you want to abandon years of passive-aggressive list updates?" Just gone. Then it was my turn. Leave list. A small, polite vibration. No confetti. Not even a prompt to rate the app. I glanced up. Carolyn gave a tiny nod, like a barista handing over a drink she no longer cared about. That was the tone of the week. Since our mutual agreement to proceed with the adult version of Let's Not, things became oddly efficient. Carolyn scheduled a consultation with a mediator who had a 5-star rating and a firm logo that looked like it belonged on a tube of toothpaste. I started organizing documents, labeling files in a folder titled Endgame. There were no dramatic fights, no late-night revelations, no performances about who hurt whom more. Carolyn packed up half her closet like she was doing inventory at a pop-up store, paused halfway through, and asked if I remembered the password to our streaming account. I told her I changed it to Mutual Exit 2023. She wrote it down. She took the car on Wednesdays and Fridays. I took it Mondays and Thursdays. Tuesdays were a wild card. We didn't speak unless something required clarification. Which detergent bottle was hers? Which plant was technically a gift? Who actually owned the Bluetooth speaker? Our conversations sounded like small claims court proceedings written by people who used to be in love but now ran a duplex-themed podcast. One afternoon, she walked into the living room holding the router. "I think it's yours." "I don't need custody of the internet," I said. "Just unplug it on your way out." She placed it down gently, as if it were emotionally fragile. That night, I found the original box for it in the attic. It had "Setup, do not throw away," written in Carolyn's handwriting. I took a photo of it and deleted it 10 seconds later. Sentimentalism was beginning to feel like a hobby I no longer had time for. The mediation itself was boring in a way only paperwork can be. We sat across from each other, not as adversaries, but as reluctant project managers trying to finalize a spreadsheet. The mediator, Sharon, a woman with glasses and a voice that suggested she hadn't raised her volume since 1998, guided us through asset division like we were negotiating over the division of dry office supplies. There were some mild debates. Carolyn argued that the cutting board belonged to the kitchen and therefore should remain with the home. I reminded her she only started using it when she read that bread slicing was a form of mindfulness. We compromised. She took the board. I kept the cables drawer, which was a tangled nightmare, but mine in spirit. The house would be sold. We agreed. Neither of us had the energy to pretend it was still a home. We chose a realtor from a list of 3, based entirely on who had the fewest exclamation points in their bio. Listing photos were taken. Furniture was staged. The pinball machine went into storage, not because I wanted to keep it, but because no one should be forced to explain it to potential buyers. When the house went live on the market, Carolyn sent me a screenshot of the listing. No message, just the link. I clicked it, stared at our living room, wide angle, strategically lit, and wondered how many strangers would walk through that space pretending they could picture themselves living there. The silence that followed wasn't painful, just persistent. The kind that wraps itself around your daily life without asking permission. Then came the last conversation. It happened in the driveway, which felt fitting. We'd stood there 100 times before, arguing over nothing. Whose turn it was to bring in groceries, who dented the trash can, why the hose was never wound properly. Now, we stood facing each other with the kind of awkward calm that comes when 2 people finally run out of choreography. Carolyn wore sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. Her arms were crossed, not defensively, just comfortably. I held a manila envelope that included signed copies of the final agreement, neatly paper-clipped. She looked at me. I looked back. She cleared her throat. "So, we're doing this. Unless you want to turn it into a podcast." She smirked. Briefly. Wouldn't get enough subscribers. Not with that attitude. A pause. Then she said, "I didn't think it would end like this." Statistically, neither did we. She shifted her weight slightly, as if standing still too long might reveal something. "I didn't plan to. Let's not do the retrospective," I interrupted. "We both did things. Or didn't do things. Either way, the ending's here." Another pause. "I'm not unhappy," she said. "Neither am I," I replied, which is probably the strangest part. She nodded once, then reached into her bag and handed me a flash drive. "What's this?" "Photos. Trips. Events. Just in case you wanted copies." I didn't delete mine. I just archived them. I took it, not because I needed it, but because refusing would have made it dramatic, and we were both too tired for that. We stood there for a few more seconds, not saying anything, not moving, just letting the moment sit between us like the last box you don't want to unpack. Then she got in her car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without ceremony. I didn't wave. Back inside, I sat on the couch. Our couch, soon to be someone else's, and opened the flash drive on my laptop. Folder names: Montana, Anniversary 2016, Lake House Weekend, random stuff. I selected them all, moved them to a new folder, and named it Done. No password protection, no encryption, just stored, labeled, and closed. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel